for the Northern California region and the Pacific Division lead for international humanitarian law. And we have these meetings once a month, and it's usually having to do with armed conflict, forced migration, or disaster. And every other month we do climate change because it's so important in terms of the fabric of our. Thank you. You can just leave it. And to the fabric of our lives. Life has changed so much in the last 10 to 15 years. Some people, for instance, Roop from the Global Climate Center, the Global Climate Center for the Red Cross movement has been around for 20 years. But America, the United States, American Red Cross is just catching up now. So it's exciting. We're going to have a new movement towards climate change. And I want to welcome all of you. I want to tell you a little bit about the chat. Please put your questions in the chat or unmute yourselves and ask the questions personally. I'm going to ask you to stay off camera except for the panelists, just because of the bandwidth. We don't know how many total people will be on here and how challenging the metrics might be in terms of being able to see people. But I'm really excited about this, and I want to thank, I don't know if Michelle Averill, our CEO for the Central Coast, is on, but she was the first chapter in California and possibly in the United States to have a green business. So the Red Cross office in Santa Cruz is now a green business, which means it's adapted to the California resources to make that happen. So I'm really excited that she made that happen. If Barry Falk is on the line, he's our regional director, an amazing human being. And I'd like to thank all of the dignitaries that have come from all over the United States to participate and hear this talk, and for your interest in climate change. This is going to be recorded. So if any of you do not want to be recorded in terms of panelists, please let me know. And also, if any of you in the audience don't want to be recorded when you speak, just alert me that, and we'll turn off the recording while you ask your question. In any case, what I'd love to do is start with Marianne Labalbo. She happens to be up in the left-hand corner. She's the last one. So I'm going to start with Roop Singh, whom I love very dearly. I heard her podcast and I heard her speak a number of times. And she comes from the heart, and she works with youth, and she works with climate change all over the world, and particularly with heat and what the changes are with heat. And then Jono Anzalone, I've known him for eons, and his uncle used to be my doctor. Wonderful coincidence. But he's worked as international director of international services at American Red Cross. He's worked for the Central and South American countries and working in disaster response. He's an amazing human being. And then we have Brett Maloney, who I just met, who teaches a course at Middlebury, and also works with FarmWorks. And Middlebury are one of the groups of students that have helped us with climate change. And then we have Patrick, who is Patrick, who is working with Climate Solutions in Fremont, he has a web page where people can look and be interactive and find out information about all sorts of things. And then Marianne Labalbo, I've known for 30, almost 40 years, when she and I were in a play together. But she's going to tell you about her history and how she ended up in climate change right now. In any case, thank you all for being here. Please, if you have any questions after the speakers speak, we'll hold the questions till the end. But without any further ado, I'm going to have Roop talk about her personal journey to getting into climate change and what she does with heat and youth.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jill. It's really wonderful to be here. Nice to see all of you in the room. And like Jill said, feel free to ask any questions as I'm talking in the chat, because I'd be happy to answer them. So maybe to start off, I'm a climate risk advisor with the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, which is sort of this global reference center on climate change and climate variability. for the entire Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. So that includes American Red Cross, but it also goes to other Red Cross and Red Crescent societies like Canadian Red Cross or Somali Red Crescent, for example. But how did I end up working in climate change with the Red Cross? So when I was younger, I always had sort of this innate interest in the weather. I was obsessed with thunderstorms. I thought they were the coolest thing in the world. So I actually ended up doing my undergraduate degree in meteorology and atmospheric science. So I studied weather. I was just fascinated by how it worked, and I wanted to be able to do something that could potentially help others. So being able to forecast the weather, being able to forecast a tornado outbreak, or other types of weather was kind of the goal originally. And then as I started to do my degree, I realized that a lot of that work involved sitting behind a computer, looking at lots of computer models of the weather. And I thought that I wanted to engage with real people. And I didn't think that just becoming a meteorologist would help me down that path. And so I started to look out for opportunities to engage with like people on issues related to the weather. And that's where I came across sort of this huge issue of climate change that many of us are dealing with and also working on right now. And I ended up enrolling in a program called Climate and Society. It was a master's program at Columbia University. It's actually now part of their climate school, the first in the country. And there I met someone who was working for the Red Cross on humanitarian issues and disasters, but also looking at how can we use forecasts to anticipate disasters before they happen. And that really allowed me to connect the meteorology side, the things that I was learning in school, with things that were actually impacting people, the disasters that the Red Cross deals with on a day-to-day basis. And so that's how I sort of entered into working with the Red Cross. And I guess now my role is focused on extreme heat. And also I do a lot of work with scientists on sort of assessing how is climate change affecting real people, and also taking questions from Red Cross national societies and helping scientists to answer those questions so that the things that we're researching are actually applicable on the ground. But I think the thing that I'm most excited about right now is our work on extreme heat. So I want to tell you a little bit more about that. So heat waves and extreme heat is one of the clearest signs of climate change. We used to call climate change global warming because temperatures are rising, but it's the thing that we've already started to see. All heat waves that are happening around the world are more or less made worse by climate change now. Scientists have told us that we can really prove that. And I guess one of the biggest examples is the heat wave that we saw in the Pacific Northwest last year. It was a heat wave that would have been virtually impossible without climate change. And it wasn't one without impacts. We saw impacts to infrastructure. Railway lines were impacted, power outages occurred. You had a breakdown in some of the transportation infrastructure, but not just that, to real people. So if you look at the data of how many people were impacted by that heat wave, it's surprising, but the number of deaths that we saw in the US and Canada was estimated to be 1,408, and that's still thought to be an underestimate. And that's a huge number, right? Because believe it or not, heat waves are actually the deadliest disasters that we see in the US. Hurricanes and sort of tropical cyclones and floods are the ones that capture our attention because they're newsworthy. They're the ones where we see like the winds and the water on TV sort of blowing away people's homes. But when it comes down to it, heat waves are the ones that tend to really cause deaths at huge numbers. But the thing that is really hopeful about extreme heat is that there's lots of actions that we can take to reduce our impact. So I want to tell you the story of Europe. maybe back in 2003, you remember there was this big heat wave that affected Europe. And Europe is a little different from the United States in that a lot of regions don't have air conditioning. It's tended to be a more temperate climate in the past. And so air conditioning isn't nearly as common as it is in the US. So they had this massive heat wave and 70,000 people died. It was a lot of elderly people who weren't able to sort of leave their homes. Perhaps they had disabilities and they didn't have anyone to come in and check on them. That was a massive loss, but also a wake-up call for Europe. So in the years after that heat wave, they implemented heat wave action plans across cities, across countries. They have alert systems so that once a heat wave is imminent, they send out alerts throughout through their weather service. They have telephone hotlines where people can call in, or you can register to call to have someone call you. In France, for example, within 7 minutes of sort of every home, there is a cooling shelter available. So there's lots of things that have been done. And if we look at more recent heat waves in Europe, the change has been huge. We haven't ever seen quite that level of death. And so I think it's really remarkable that there are so many things that we can do, but especially as a Red Cross, if you're doing sort of normal things like first aid, are we taking into account how do you recognize the signs of heat exhaustion or heat stroke? And what do you do about it if you were to recognize those signs? So there's lots of things that a local Red Cross chapter could also be doing. And there are tons of things that Red Cross national societies around the world are starting to do. Maybe to end and share kind of what is happening this year. This year on June 14th, internationally, we're doing a heat action day. So back in 2018, the India Red Cross had done these like heat wave flash mobs where they showed up in busy places and they told people about heat wave risks. And then they also told them what they could be doing to reduce that risk. They were invited to the airport where lots of people were working outside and really vulnerable to do this flash mob. And it really it started a conversation in that airport to change the working conditions of people in that area. And so we took that idea and we said on June 14th, we want to see 100 flash mobs, heat wave flash mobs in cities and towns around the world. So we're inviting Red Cross national societies and branches everywhere to sign up to do a flash mob. And I'm hoping that some of you also decide to join in. I'll share a resource of how to do the flash mob and what it's all about in the chat. But I'm happy to answer questions about this or any of my other work, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Roop. Would you also put down your wonderful podcast on heat? I would love that in the chat as well. That'd be wonderful. Okay, Jono, you're on.
Awesome. That's a hard act to follow. Flash mobs are fun, but it relates to, I think, a theme where I'll land in the journey that I've been on. I have known Jill for a very long time and started my career as a Red Cross youth in 1994, and was really looking for something that resonated with the values that my parents taught in terms of service and community, and also just kind of very esoterically, just the inherent dignity in all people and things. And I was like, ooh, this Red Cross thing sounds like it aligns. And the 7 fundamental principles, I was just like, yes, I totally get it. I just remember going into a Red Cross chapter and seeing signs of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and the 4 other principles. And I was like, yeah, I can get behind this. So it's really been a lifelong journey, although I no longer work full-time for the organization. As Jill mentioned, I've had a number of posts both domestically, where I started in Omaha. In fact, I'm at my parents' house visiting near where I started my Red Cross disaster mission way back then, and really serving posts across the globe, covered domestic portfolio with US government operations, our international services portfolio, where we had programming in 34 countries with partner Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, as Roop mentioned, working with many of the reference centers, including the Climate Center, as well as my most recent mission, serving as the head of disaster and crisis in the Americas. And throughout the pandemic, having spent a large part of my Red Cross career on the response and recovery side, I hit a point in time. I'm 43, but I remember hitting 40 and thinking, I can't do this for the rest of my life. Like the increase in intensity of events, frequency, several colleagues that I know that are on the line here that deploy, one-way tickets for long periods of time and not knowing, when you're going to return home. It's just not sustainable. And my husband and I were kind of having a life reflection during when I was considering renewing with the IFRC. And, really what got me excited about things and still hope were working with youth and largely young people that see climate change as one of the most pressing issues, top 3, typically in global surveys in terms of issues of their lifetime. And, the optimist in me wants to believe that young people really are the secret sauce for bold action that many individuals hope for to address extreme heat and heat events, as well as the myriad of other issues related to climate change. And so I was kind of searching around thinking about, it's hard to leave the Red Cross family. One never leaves the Red Cross family, I would argue. And also trying to find something that I felt was going to be part of a solution, nonpartisan solution, in much of the same ways that the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society really works towards ways to influence systems changes using humanitarian diplomacy. And I was fortunate that I saw an advert for a new nonprofit that wants to educate, empower, and activate 10 million youth by 2025. And I thought, wow, what a great time to start a nonprofit in the middle of a pandemic while schools are, in disarray. But what was really inspiring to me are the young voices behind that really reminded me back when I was a young person in 1994, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life that was beyond self. And it really felt like the next best move to really align with the global network of organizations that are collectively trying to address things like extreme heat. So the Climate Initiative is a nonpartisan youth organization. We work with youth 13 to 23 years old. And the idea is to truly provide a third space for youth that may not feel that they want to go the Sunrise Movement route or other organizations that do amazing work. I used to be one of those youth, and I still applaud those efforts. But with the increase, certainly the statistical evidence from the APA on the increase in climate anxiety that youth are facing, providing youth with a third space where they feel they can make positive action and systems changes or work towards those in a way that does teach them what a lot of people have really felt is needed, which is these skills to navigate complexity, complex systems, and complex conversations, frankly. Some of the best things that I've seen really tackled in multilateral platforms take years to negotiate, but they often have the greatest impact downrange. So our 13 to 23-year-olds, we feel right on the cusp of being able to make important life decisions, whether it be to study social science with a climate lens, to study art with a climate lens. We have the amazing senior that's graduating this year that's going to study fashion, all through an environmental lens. And so interdisciplinary approach to really learning about the science, but also translating that into other fields. And since we've started, it's been beyond my belief in terms of how committed youth are to the cause. And related to heat, a large part of our work in our learning labs has been focused on events that are as a result of extreme heat, whether it be drought or wildfires. And in particular, kind of building on some work that I did when I was with the IFRC with the Adrian Arsh Rockefeller Resilience Center through the Atlantic Council. And they have an entire curated program on extreme heat events. And Kathy McLeod and her team are just knocking it out of the park in terms of elevating the awareness of extreme heat events. Things like municipalities in Miami hiring the first ever heat resilient officer. I think that's the title-ish, but really just investing in the ecosystems that are needed in order to really address extreme heat events. And then last but not least, I think for me, I just got done presenting to some of our federal colleagues at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And with the new administration, Biden and Harris have really emphasized climate resilience, which is a distinct narrative change from what we experienced in the previous administration. And really what was exciting about the last 2 months is seeing a FEMA strategic plan, 4-year strategic plan that boldly names climate resilience in it. And dating back to when I first got started, ironically, in the same year I started as a Red Cross youth volunteer, the first federal response plan was published in 1994. Remember, FEMA was established in 1978 under executive order. It took a long time to really kind of tease out what is the agency, how do you really find your way to that first federal response plan, of which the Red Cross was an instrumental part. They were the lead agency for mass care at the time. And fast forward to today, it's the first time a FEMA strategic plan has boldly recognized not only climate resilience, but also strategic pillar number 1 is equity. And the two are interrelated, having equity at the center of extreme heat events, the most impacted populations. I remember back in the day when Red Cross used to have community service programs across the country, and they were varying. The chapter I grew up in, we had a FAN program for low-income communities to be able to really be able to cool themselves during what we were seeing as increasing periods of extreme heat in the part of the US that I grew up in. So depressing as the reports may be, or that the news may provide, there are, I think, these big systems changes and apertures, like having a federal ecosystem that is acknowledging climate change, that is acknowledging extreme heat, and not only acknowledging it, but do something about it in terms of resourcing. And then last but not least, the one thing I would just encourage folks to look at, for the first time ever, FEMA published a nature-based solutions guide, which, you know, for those of us that have worked in the international communities, I was like, why is it taking the US so long to openly talk about nature-based solutions? And yet our tribal partners, Native Americans in particular, this is part of the millennia of traditions that they have often held as recognizing we're one with nature, and nature is part of us. So really just encouraging folks, I can drop the link into the chat box, but the nature-based solutions guide is really advancing the conversation within the federal family, within tribal, state, territories, and local communities, just to recognize what's out there and possible. And importantly, especially when there are federal funds attached, ability to use those federal funds to implement nature-based solutions right here within our own geographical context in the US, while we can still learn from the years of advanced work that the Climate Center has done with Red Cross, Red Crescent national societies across the globe, and other nation states in really advancing nature-based solutions, which of course get to the issue of extreme heat. Some of the amazing rooftop designs that I've seen in large metropolitan areas have just been mind-blowing to me. And every time I go to New York or Miami, I just think we're so far behind. Like, we've got to do more to really catch up with what we know is good science. So I'll end there and just want to say it's a little bit of imposter syndrome because I'm not a scientist. I'm an economist by training, but really excited to be here with esteemed colleagues and to learn.
Thank you so much, Jono, for that wonderful, all of you for that those wonderful presentations. And now I'm going to introduce Brett Malone, who is, did I pronounce your name correctly, Brett? I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. That's good.
Brett is with Middlebury Institute. He teaches a course yearly there, but he also works with FarmWorks and works with water and with farm workers. And I thought it would be really important, since water is one of the main things that is connected with heat, that he be here. And he also works with graduate students all the time, who are the youth that are going to proceed with whatever we create in this life of ours. So Brett, if you'd go for it, please, that'd be wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill, for the introduction and for the opportunity to join the conversation today. And it's really great to hear Roop and Jono speak. Honored to be here. So as Jill mentioned, my name is Brett Malone. I wear a few different hats, but my kind of primary work is with an organization called California Farm Link, and I am the Chief Business Strategies Officer there, which means I oversee the education programs, which are focused on farmers, ranchers, and fishers in California, as well as a lending program serving that those types of businesses. We are what's known as a community development financial institution. That's a certification that the Department of Treasury provides to community-based financial institutions that make capital available to low and moderate income communities. And so our focus is on making capital available to farmers and fishers that otherwise wouldn't be able to access it through banks and other more conventional means. So I'll talk a bit more about my work there in a couple minutes, but as Jill mentioned, I'm also an adjunct instructor at the Middlebury Institute. I'm also an alum there. I did my master's work in international environmental policy and focused on watershed management, coastal zone management, and sustainable agriculture. And going back to kind of where I grew up, my parents worked in agriculture in South Florida. My father worked for a family farm operation that grew avocados, limes, and mangoes. My mother had a tropical plant nursery. This was in near the Everglades. Experienced preparations for hurricanes there as a little kid. Dealt with, we lived in a grove, an 80-acre grove, where the well water that irrigated the trees was also our drinking water, which was contaminated with pesticides. Grew up with the kids of farm workers, who were dealing with a lot of issues. So the way I kind of encapsulated is I fell in love with the bounty and the dark underbelly of agriculture as a kid. Ended up moving to California as a teenager, got away from agriculture for a while. But when I was doing my graduate studies at the Middlebury Institute, I started working with Latino farmers in the Elkhorn Slough watershed, which is a gem of a place. It's a National Estuarine Research Reserve that feeds into the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And this watershed, there's a lot of Latino and Japanese farmers of Latino and Japanese descent farming in this very hilly area where there were very high rates of erosion that was basically putting fertilizer and residues of pesticides into the slough and getting out into the marine sanctuary. So I started to learn about how farmers get information around managing natural resources that they depend on to manage their businesses. And that kind of led me down a path to bring me to where I am today, which is working with beginning small scale and minority or BIPOC farmers and ranchers throughout California. I also spent a few years living in Chile, where my wife is from, working on an organic farm and doing locally based sustainability work throughout Latin America. So at California Farm Link, we focus on the farmers that we do because it's challenging for them to access resources, broadly speaking, information and education, capital, and land. Whether or not these folks own their land or even own the business that they work in, they are stewards of the land and natural resources. Many of the farmers that we work with were farm workers themselves, working for somebody else, and now they're entrepreneurs and running their own businesses, try to make a living, primarily growing food, although they grow other things as well. And as has been mentioned several times, water, and the scarcity in California anyway for farmers is the bigger issue associated with water, right? In other places, it's an overabundance of water at certain times. But in working with farmers in California, ensuring that they have access to adequate water to grow crops is a huge challenge. And we've been seeing farmers that we work with lose access to water that they had previously. And it really varies by geography how a farmer accesses water, right? It can be via a well, or it could be via surface water or an irrigation district. Sometimes, farmers can access water through surface water and wells, or sometimes it's only just one. The farmers that we work with tend to be tenant farmers. So many of them don't own the land that they farm on, they're leasing it. And often the leases are short term, meaning 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. And so they don't have secure land tenure, which means that they're lacking the financial incentive to invest in practices that are going to help them be more resilient to climate change. And it also means that they have less stability with their business in terms of income. So they have a market, but turns out they don't have enough land to grow their crops on. They're going to be challenged to make a living and invest in their business. So at FarmLink, we're really trying to support farmers and ranchers to invest in practices such as putting in cover crops when they don't have crops growing, or to put in hedgerows that are going to attract beneficial insects and create windbreaks, to use compost, to make compost, practices that are associated with organic production. Regenerative agriculture is a term that is being used quite a bit these days, and much of that you could think of kind of connecting with what Jono talked about in terms of nature-based solutions. Many of the practices that are going to help farmers be more resilient to climate change are essentially trying to mimic what nature does, but in in an agricultural environment. So the federal government and some state governments provide money, cost share money for farmers and ranchers to implement many of these practices. But if you don't have a long-term lease or you don't own your land, it can be very challenging to access these programs. And so we're working with organizations that operate at the local level that actually exist in virtually all counties throughout the US, resource conservation districts, or soil conservation districts as they're known. They work one-on-one with farmers and ranchers and landowners to help them develop conservation plans and access federal and state cost share programs to help them implement those programs. So there are resources that are available, but they can be challenging to access. And of course, there's bureaucracy that goes along with that. So the need for farmers and ranchers to be more resilient in the face of climate change is essential. We saw all of the supply chain interruptions during COVID, right? And that was unrelated to climate, but then there were a lot of climate-related issues happening, wildfires, right, and heat waves and droughts all happening at the same time. And so really understanding as a consumer where your food comes from, what challenges farmers that are producing that food are facing, is something that we can all do. So maybe I'll stop there and look forward to the conversation.
Brett, thank you so much for that. I'm Mark Silverstein, who is the Elkhorn Slough person. I have had speak on climate change, and he's amazing. He's done wonderful things during COVID with farm workers, giving them land to plant in part of their foundation. So anyway, thank you for that. That's great. In any case, I'd like to introduce Patrick, who has created part of creating climate solutions. He's a program manager there and has done things for the city, and a city of Fremont, I believe, and also other areas in Palo Alto, and sets up platforms that cities can use for ordinary everyday people to access how they can best support their community having to do with climate change. So Patrick, without any further ado, would you go ahead and speak?
Thank you so
You're
much,
a stranger, only for about 5 minutes, and then you become friend. So please go ahead.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Jill. It's so nice to be here with everyone else. And I've already loved what I've learned so far. Can't wait for the discussion afterwards. But yeah, I'm the program manager with a nonprofit, Community Climate Solutions, and we partner with cities and counties across the country. So we work in 12 different states with about 45 cities. And we're actually just about to launch a 6-county regional effort in the Central Coast. So I know quite a few of you are calling in from, that local Red Cross chapter. So there'll be localized platforms and challenges available for the 6 counties that make up the Central Coast, where a lot of Brett's work is happening as well. But yeah, a little bit about how I came to this role and kind of my climate journey. I went to Colorado College and was really excited to study science. But whenever I was in a science class in my first year, I always thought, how does this connect back to my life or the life of other people? How do we affect these systems? And so I realized I really wanted to learn more about the connection between the bio, geo, and chemical cycles and the societies we live in, and vice versa, the human impacts on these cycles. So that took me to study environmental science, and was super passionate about research and was applying to grad schools. And then for a variety of reasons, including the 2016 election, I realized I wanted to focus on people and on building a movement and, seeing the history of all the big climate victories we've had, from the Clean Air Act to the Clean Water Act, and how a lot of those came because people came together and wanted their leaders to listen to them. So I organized on environmental and public health campaigns in California, and kept on running into the same questions people would have, which is, great, I'll sign this petition or I'll come to this rally, but what else can I do? How else can I make an impact? And I also noticed that it was the same subsection of people who were coming to all those rallies or volunteer events. And so I had my own questions about, how can we go beyond? How can we get the average American who maybe it doesn't feel like they're an activist, but cares about climate change or extreme heat or disasters and wants to do something? How can we tap into those folks? And so I learned about community climate solutions and the work they're doing. And I think what I'll actually do is show versus just tell, because I know I'm sure we have some visual learners here. And so I'm going to pull up my my screen here. Don't worry, not too many slides, but I'm going to show a little bit about the work we're doing and the online tool that we have that anyone here can feel free to use. So first off, a lot of people feel like residential actions or community actions don't matter, but when we scale it up across the country, just 5 basic household activities contribute to 40% of U.S. emissions, according to EPA data. So what that means is there's actually really meaningful role that we can all play in the way we get around, or the ways we power, heat our homes, or the food we eat and the waste we create, that can actually really dramatically reduce emissions today and tomorrow. And we also need to be pushing our cities and our countries to be, moving forward on policy. But I'm sure we all have a similar feeling that that's not happening fast enough. And there are other things that we can do as well. The other really key fact is that, people are at this point now where climate change has started to affect all of our lives, from those extreme heat waves to other, disasters, the more consistent fire and smoke in the West, to the crazy weather going on in the East Coast with like December tornadoes and wild early thaws that kind of mess up the whole ecosystem. And so Yale University research has found that 70% of Americans in 2021 felt a personal responsibility to act on the climate crisis, but a vast majority of those people didn't really know what they could do, how they could act on that concern. And so for all of those reasons, we've created an online tool that's free for residents or communities to use. And I don't actually have chat access, but it's brightaction.app if you want to search on your browser and explore after this. I can also see if Jill can send this along. But the tool is basically a gamified way to learn about sustainability and be motivated to take new actions that reduce your impact. And so you can create your profile to understand your carbon footprint for your home. You can learn about and take sustainable actions to reduce your impact and get more prepared for disasters or emergencies. And then there's some great opportunities to work together. And so the students here at Middlebury, you could work with your college clubs or your classrooms on like a classroom climate challenge. And Red Cross staff, like we've had some great employee, workplaces run fun challenges together. So there's some great ways that you can use this in your existing networks, whether that's your friends or a more formal community. But so here is our San Jose platforms. That's why you'll see Climate Smart San Jose Challenge here. And the energy profile just touches on those 5 common household activities that contribute to 40% of US emissions. So it's like a short profile that uses localized data, and it's optional. You don't have to complete it. But when you do complete it, you see the household starting level for your home. so the carbon footprint for everyone who lives in your household. And then you can see a helpful comparison for how you compare to others in your community or other countries, as well as track and measure your progress as you take new actions to reduce your impact. So this household started at 30 tons for a household of 3, but have been able to reduce their carbon footprint, about 20% by identifying new actions they can take using the tool. And so we have over 100 actions on the platform that you can learn about and take. For those who are really deeply involved in environmental work, you'll still be surprised at finding some new things that you haven't thought of or done yet. And for everyone, there's really something here. There's over 50 actions that have no upfront cost, as well as a lot that are the heavy hitters and can reduce your impact the biggest. But I'm going to touch on the resiliency category because I know that's a lot of the work that the Red Cross is working on, is responding to disasters, but also thinking about how we can reduce the consequences of disasters when they happen, or be more resilient so that, if there's heavy rainfall, flooding is lower because all of our storm drains are being managed effectively, for example. And so we have some really clear steps for folks to learn about risks and build their kit, make a plan, etc., as well as a lot of holistic ideas like connecting with your community or sharing resources. And each action has a wealth of information there to help you understand, what the action is and then what you need to do to complete that new action. So one example is we have disaster-specific action pages so you can learn about extreme heat and what you can do and how you can stay safe in that situation. And the goal here is just to make it really easy and simple for someone to learn about something new and help provide them the competence and the motivation needed to take those new actions. And so for climate-related actions, we have the program is gamified. So for example, a lot of the climate-related actions, resiliency, you're not reducing your carbon footprint by getting ready for disaster, but it's still a great thing to do. But let's say you're working on making a meal plan, so you reduce the food waste that you experience in your home. You'll see a different impact depending on the way you take an action, and points are tied directly to your carbon reduced or your water reduced. So the more points you get, the more of an impact you have for your household and then for your community as well. So community groups can be formed. So you could have, like, this is a Girl Scout chapter, the troop in the Santa Clara area. So this troop of Girl Scouts together, took 39 new actions as a troop of girls, and were able to save $4,000 and reduce 19,000 gallons and kind of see the collective impact when they all work together. And so there's some great opportunities for communities to, see the great work when we all do something on our own or together as groups. And so we're really excited to support community groups here. If you represent one or know of one, like a faith-based community or a neighborhood association or, a advocacy group for farmers, we'd be really happy to work with them on creating a fun and meaningful climate challenge that they can bring to their community to empower those to take action. So that's just the quick overview of the work we're doing, empowering cities and communities to take action, and a great online tool we have to help folks navigate some of these complicated processes and thoughts. And that's it for today. So I'll be happy to answer questions when we get there.
That's amazing, Patrick. Thank you so much. That's amazing. I'd love for you, all of you, to begin to start putting your questions in the chat, but I also invite you, when it's time, to open up your microphone and open up your face so we can see you and ask the question. One person has their hand up.
Yeah, that was accidental. Sorry, but I don't actually have a chat function. I don't know if that's just my account, but
no worries. But I'll give you the questions, Patrick, if they're addressed to you or in general. And so no worries. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Marianne, who she and I go back at least 30 years, maybe 40.
Yes, I know.
Anyway, she has an amazing history, so I'm going to let her explain it to you, and then we'll go from there.
Why, thank you, Jill, and thank you, Patrick. I'm going to steal your thing and put it on our website here at the County of Santa Cruz. I think that's a great tool to figure out what you can do to help out with saving the planet. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of my sordid past. It's pretty sordid, but let's see. I'm from Long Island, New York, and my first degree was in pattern making technology at the Fashion Institute of Technology. And I worked in the business for a little while in Manhattan, and I didn't like it, so I left there and I went back to teaching dance and auditioning for shows in Manhattan. And then my mom saw an audition notice for Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, and so I went for that audition. And as I was dancing and doing the steps, I was teaching other people there. Anyway, 2 weeks later, I got a call. I got the job. And so I left January 3rd, 1980 to Venice, Florida to live on a train and travel with the circus. And I learned how to perform webs. So I used to go up high up about 20 feet with all the other girls, and we used to get spun, and it was pretty fun. We used to dance up there. And also I danced on the Hippodrome track, which is what they called that track that went around the rings. And avoid elephants from stepping on you. And we wore some fantastic heavy costumes, and it's coming back next year, but they're not going to have the animals, but it's going to be a whole new concept. That's going to be exciting. But living on the train was really cool too. And then I traveled the United States on the back roads of America, which is really cool. So as a photographer, performer, an animal, and nature lover, I was having the time of my life. And then after about 2 years, I decided to go live in nature. So I moved up to California and up into during a snowstorm. I did it in the end of January. Can you believe it? Drove cross country, went up to Mammoth Lakes, and I went to live in the Sierra Mountains. And there wasn't so much theater. I was there about a year. We had to have a parade to show LA that we weren't covered by the volcano because it never did spew yet. And it was pretty fun doing that. And then I moved to Santa Cruz because they had a lot of theater, and I met my husband, my first husband. But then in 1990, we went back to the circus for a year, and I did performing, and we took some friends from Santa Cruz also. And there we actually were doing recycling. We actually did recycle cans and bottles, and we had a clear bag and a dark bag on the side of the train on the handles that you put your trash in and your recyclables. And so the person who had a car who did overland trips, they would take it and recycle it depending on whatever state you can recycle it to. So that was my beginnings of recycling. And who knew I was going to come back to it somehow in another way. And then what happened was I went back to Santa Cruz, and I was working at fabric stores, and because that was my background. And then I had a bar for 10 years. Talk about recycling bottles. Oh my goodness. We had someone just come and pick them up. And then I got divorced, but then I got a job and got remarried. Got a job with the County of Santa Cruz of accounts payable. And so during the storms in 2017, it was amazing trying to get the checks out to all the contractors that were helping with all the mudslides and all the things that were happening in Santa Cruz. I actually, some of the times I walked down the stairs and went out and gave it to the guy as he's on his phone setting up the next mudslide move and where they're going to put the mud and all that. So it was a crazy time. But then a new job opened up. It was a program coordinator. We now call it a zero waste program coordinator. And I got hired. And then they hired another gal. And we're known as the Trash Twins on KSCO on the third Wednesday of the month at 8:30 till 9. And then we're sometimes have been called Lucy and Ethel. So we get going about trash and recycling. And so there she is. There's my buddy, Christina. Woohoo! We have fun. We actually work with a lot of places, with schools, helping them to correct their what they do with their recycling, their trash, and now with food waste. And making sure that we're keeping things out of the landfill because our landfill is filling up. And we got to heal the planet. And I'll tell you, the methane that's developed from food that ends up in a landfill is like 84 times worse than CO2. So don't put your food in the landfill if you possibly can, because what happens, it gets covered, it doesn't break down, there's no air. And so we got to collect it and compost it and put the carbon back into the soil. That's the best place for it. And guess what? That soil is probably better than buying some of these chemicals that they have for fertilizing your plants. You can use that product, and it's so much better for you. And we know climate change is real, and so we don't have to argue about it if it's who does it and whose causes at it. So as together, we can all work together to make it a better place. And I was just going to KSCO the other morning, going down 7th Avenue in Santa Cruz, and I looked up and there's the ocean. It's beautiful, the waves crashing, and you're like, oh, that's so pretty. But I realized what the ocean does for us is when the air heats up, actually the ocean absorbs a lot of the heat and it takes it into its waters, and who knows what kind of fish or plants that it's killing. I know some of our kelp out there is dying off. And so it does a lot for us. And then at night, when the tides change, all that stuff you leave on the beach gets taken by the ocean. It cleans it up for us, but that's not such a good thing. So we got to remember to take our trash home. And if the garbage can is full, a good thing is just take it home with you. As I turn the corner past Jill's house and I'm going to KSCO, there's those 2 garbage cans that we really want to get rid of, but had all these garbage all around it, a chair leaning up against it. And people forget that the wind does kick up, which Jill just mentioned, and it takes this stuff and brings it directly to the ocean. And it's not a very good place to be, because then everything does not float, by the way. A lot of our plastics actually sink to the bottom of the ocean. So you don't see it. And yes, Jill reminded me, we have that little patch on the ocean and it's like almost as big as Texas or parts of Texas. But you know how much more is underneath on the bottom of the ocean, breaking up into microplastics that fish eat? And then the birds eat the fish, and then the big fish eat the little fish, and then we eat the fish. And guess what? We end up with a bunch of chemicals in us. And one of those chemicals is PFAS, PFAS. I cannot say it properly, but you can look it up. I'll send a little EPA notification of what it is. It does disrupt your endocrine system, which I probably say that incorrectly, but you don't want to be having that in your system because it's a forever chemical. And also the other problems we have is that besides that getting into our water systems or anything, our landfill is filling up. And nobody wants a landfill in the backyard. So in 5 years or so, we're going to be transporting all that trash somewhere else. And what's happening is actually, if you come and drop off your trash at the landfill, it can't be 5% contaminated with recyclables. If it's more than that, we can send you home with it and have you separate it. And we'll start having you not to allow any food in there either. So we're trying to save the landfill. Let's recycle those plastics, or better yet, don't buy any plastics, which is a real cool thing. You can go to different stores. There's one in Capitola called Ethos that they buy a lot of products that have recyclable packaging and things. You can buy a bar of soap, which is actually shampoo, instead of buying that plastic container. Or take your jar, I should have brought it with me, and you can actually refill it with lotion and things of that sort that you'd like to place on your skin or in your hair or conditioner. They even have all this soap. So skip the plastic, whatever. And then bring all your own stuff. Here I have my little napkin, my little fabric napkin I take with me, my spork, which I'd bring with me so I don't have to get any of that, stuff that's not recyclable. I bring my little cup, which I love. It's double walled, so it keeps things cold or hot. And you can actually also stop just junking all your stuff. Maybe it's something you can fix. You can put it on Facebook or put it on Craigslist. Maybe someone will come and pick it up and reuse it instead of just throwing it out in the landfill. During the COVID, Christina and we worked at the landfill a couple of days a week, and the things we saw getting dumped because donation places were not open. It was a sad, sad thing. And we watched this beautiful monkey wood cabinet and 2 big things, and just that they had to destroy it and put it in the landfill. So we need everyone's help to not fill up that landfill of ours. So, and also fabrics. That's a really bad thing to put in the landfill. It doesn't break down. I had a friend who they just redid their football field at the school. He found a sweatshirt. He washed it. His daughter's wearing it today. It was 30 years old. Nothing happened to it. So try to repurpose that fabric. You can use it as patches for other pants. You can make bags out of it for your friends for Christmas. And if you're missing a button, resew it, sew your seams. Learn how to fix your own clothing. I'm sure there's a YouTube on any of that. And then if it's something that you might be able to fix, you could check ifixit.org, I think it is, or .com, and they have some wonderful products there. I'm hoping someday we'll get a place here that will teach folks how to reupholster, how to paint, how to do furniture repurposing, because the less stuff we end up in the landfill, the better off we all are. And someday, 50 years from now, they're going to excavate that landfill. And oh my goodness, the things they're going to find out about us from the past. You can even read a newspaper from 50 years ago. It's just too crazy. And then just reminder, big one, bring your coffee cup, because, you know, those coffee cups you get, they're lined with PFAS, most of them. And when you put hot products in it, actually the PFAS will go into your drink and you have a little PFAS with your coffee. So remember that. Try to bring your own cup. Starbucks is finally, from us bugging them a whole bunch, they're going to start their own reusable cups, and you pay like a deposit. We're not sure how they're going to run it, but you pay a deposit for it. And then you come back, you just throw it in the container that they have out front, and they give you your new drink in one of your cups. Currently, they give you 10 cents off your drink and 25 points towards your account. So you can get your, if you bring your own cup, you can get your extra cup of coffee sooner than later. And don't contaminate your trash is our big one. And look at what you buy. And if there's products you can buy in a farmer's market instead of in a, what are those called? The clamshells, do it, you know, or write to the companies you really like and tell them change your packaging. And so I wanted to end with a quick little poem. Water, water, not everywhere. Love and care we must bear. Plastic, plastic everywhere. People, people, we should care. Pick up 10 pieces of plastic everywhere and stop buying if you dare. So there's so much more to become a zero waste. Woo, I can go on for days, but I'll end here. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What Marianne didn't mention also, a very bit of trivia, she used to be climbing elephants. That's what she did in the
Ringling Brothers, yeah.
As well as being up on the trapeze. So
no, I
will the elephants. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the elephant I did get to ride, he was pretty funny. I used to have to hang on the side of it with my feet on it and wait till they got his foot down, because if you got stepped on his foot, they normally would lower their foot and you get off. He used to like to drop his foot fast, you'd fall off, and he'd try to step on you just for the fun of it.
Ouch.
Yeah, he wouldn't hurt you, but still, it was like, you know, you don't want to, it was just too funny. The elephants they're great. They're a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for all you've said. It's just a wealth of knowledge and information. And for those of you who do have chat function, if you want to look, and if I might have misspelled something, please correct it. And for now, please put your questions in the chat, or please open your mics and ask questions. But I'm going to start it off because I want to know what you feel, and I'm going to ask all of the panelists this, if you would answer this question. And for the others of you, please put your questions in the chat or raise your hand. What's the biggest challenge for each of you in dealing with the topic that you're dealing with? In other words, like I know, Roop, you're working with youth and climate and heat. I know that, Patrick, you're trying to get many counties to do the work of having a website. Jono, I know you're working with youth. What's the biggest challenge? And Brett, you're working with a very vulnerable population that already has so many other vulnerabilities and not just work. What are your biggest challenges? And Marianne, also, what happens to once the landfill is filled? Where does all the waste from the landfill go? So those are my questions. Don't all jump at once.
Go ahead.
You start.
I was just, we just got off of a team call about 5 hours ago about this very issue. There's so much pressure on youth, and the heaviness this week with shooting in Buffalo, shooting in California, a lot of youth that are really struggling with the leaked Supreme Court decision. there's so much that's weighing on youth that trying to create apertures of hope and also really trying to navigate all of the complexities that youth are experiencing right now is tough. So I'd say it's definitely thing number one for us. And even before, this last couple of weeks, notably when the invasion of Ukraine happened, you could just see noticeable changes to programmatic engagement. And one of the most prolific examples of that, I happen to serve on the board of the Craft Relief Emergency Fund, which is safety net for craft artisans in the disaster space. So basket makers, weavers, wood turners, carvers, ceramicists, etc. So it's a super cool organization. And one of the most prolific things that came out of the first couple of days of Ukraine was a beautiful image that an ecologist posted about migrating birds this time of year in Ukraine. And just the realization, youth were talking about this, is like nature continues despite the devastation that's caused by humans. And so it's a long way of saying it's just, I just wish that I could just hit pause for youth today and just give them a little breathing space to feel that there is hope. Because I know there is. I wake up every morning thinking it is, because that's the way I'm hardwired. But I just wish that they could feel that and really believe it.
Yeah, maybe I can use that as a jumping point as well. So I also teach a class of fairly young people in their early 20s who are focusing on climate change issues, and like the climate darkness that they express so often is, yeah, it's very apparent. And so one of the things that I've seen is that there's a lot of sort of psychosocial support needed. And there's also just a lot of like stepping back from always being the ones who are seen as needing to be the ones who are the leaders. I think there tends to be a lot of pressure to on youth to need to kind of be the people who solve all the problems in the future, especially from older generations. In terms of our work on heat waves, one of the biggest things that we face is that I kind of think that heat waves are a lot like sugar. We like heat, we like summer. Everyone's looking forward to the hot weather. So we don't think of it as this like bad thing, right? I personally love the summer. I hate the cold, and I am always looking forward to the temperatures rising. But we're supposed to have, like, it's going to be 91 degrees here over the weekend, 2 days of very high temperatures when we haven't seen those kinds of temperatures for months. And so are people prepared? Do they have their air conditioners out? Are they realizing that maybe they're going to have to change their activities this weekend? Probably not. And so there's a big risk perception problem. And also, like, as you get older, your risk changes, right? But we actually have to mentally update that in our brains and say, hey, maybe because I'm of a certain age, or I'm taking certain medications, I'm more at risk. But that often doesn't happen. And so personal perception of risk is one of the biggest things that we need to get across. And so that's why we do a lot of awareness raising. One of the biggest things we need to do is just, there's so many self-protective actions you can take. It's just a matter of actually knowing to take them at the right moment.
Thank you, Roop. Thanks very much. Other panelists want to share? Go ahead, Marianne.
So you're wondering where that trash is going to go. Well, once the cell, that's what it's called, the last cell that we have left at the landfill closes, we'll actually be transporting all the trash waste to Marina, because they have a lot more time, but that's as long as they allow us. We might end up having to we put it into a large, one of these big trucks with the trailer. We might end up having to go a lot further. And who knows, maybe even put it on a barge. Maybe it might not be allowed to land. Remember that story? But anyway, it all depends. We're hoping also maybe by train. It could also possibly be moved that way. But yeah, so less trash we won't have to transport as much, and it'll be better for us and the planet.
Marianne. Brett.
Patrick, you were going to go. Go ahead. And I'll go
No,
after you.
Go ahead. Whoever wants to.
Sure.
Totally open.
Yeah, so kind of like what Roop was saying is we have all these actions, but how do we help people know when is the right time to take them? I think the big challenge is people feel like there's a lot of barriers, like they don't know what to do, they don't know how to do it, they don't know how to find the rebates or figure out the permitting. And so we've really worked to figure out ways to create fun and meaningful frameworks for folks to engage in learning about sustainability. Like, for example, we have a climate solutions curriculum that's open sourced for educators so they can work with their students and have a timeline and themes. So one week it's resiliency, 1 week it's climate, 1 week it's water, and they're helping people work together and learn together. And we have a team leader program that helps neighbors do that same thing on their blocks. So that's the big challenge in meaningful behavior change is just like all the barriers that exist and the fact that people oftentimes feel busy and stressed and overwhelmed. So how we can create that space for people who want to do something to actually be able to do that.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it.
And I'll share, I think listening to Jono talk about, the burden on youth in these times made me think about the burden on farmers, and that farmers, think about farmers being very in tune with the weather, right? And they're very affected by the weather. But they also are, of course, affected by the climate. And there are big expectations on farmers about how they farm because of the relationship that has to climate, mitigation and adaptation. And so, farmers are getting up every day and having to believe that they will be able to produce a crop despite the weather and the climate to make a living and feed people. And they also are being depended upon to help influence what the climate is going to look like in the future. And I don't have it of course depends on who you talk to, how they interact with the weather versus the climate, but farmers, of course, are very aware of the expectations placed on them. And so this, I think, the juxtaposition of having to live in the moment because they're dealing with weather in order to make a living, but they also obviously need to be concerned about the climate, how that affects them, and how their actions will affect all of us. So I think it's just a really challenging, as this issue is.
Yeah, and I think you bring up also a really good point that the vulnerability is, well, at least for me, what I notice both internationally and locally is that the people that are the most vulnerable are the ones that are most affected by climate change. And the people that have lower income are usually the ones the greater affected because they live near a floodplain, or their houses are right near the sea level rising, or farm workers have to depend on the weather and water in order to survive. And so those things are very, very key in terms of challenges. And I think especially since we're dealing quite often with the inequities having to do with services, both in Red Cross and in other services, I think it's really important to look at that. And I have some questions in the chat that I'd love to share with you. If I would, the very first one is, I think was, somebody lives in Solano County. What is the best way to find local groups they live in Solano County to connect with about zero waste and creating maybe apertures of hope for our youth? is it Google? Does anybody in the panel have any ideas regarding Solano County?
I did write in there about CRRA, California Resource Recovery Association. Check in with them. Maybe they may know, but I also would check in any of the stores nearby if you have any that are a zero waste store. And then there's the nonprofit organizations. I'm not sure where Solano is, sorry. But a lot of people come over from San Jose to do beach cleanups, and they learn a lot from there too.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. The other one was, I don't know if I'm on. Okay, the other question was, or the other comment was, I would check, let's see, Art Stein mentions, launch our trash into space. Don't laugh. I've heard it might be a possibility. Marianne, you're closing your head.
Well,
yeah,
look, wait, before you answer, Marianne, this is Art. I'm throwing that out there because I think that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard, because we should be learning from everything we're doing today and how we now want to move to where we put all the trash. Sorry, it was just, yeah, I was a little frustrated. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, there's actually a company, they're going to try to collect the trash up there because there's like 2,000 pieces floating around that if you do go up to space, you could get hit by it, And so there's actually some people who might start doing some recovery of the trash up there. Some really big trucks, they're going to go up there, or maybe a train, who knows? But yeah, we got to get it out of there. Most of it is not ours, thank goodness. US's, it's someone else's, I forget. Listen to Science Friday. You learn a lot of different things. Or Neil deGrasse Tyson. Oh my gosh, the things you learn from them. Podcast.
Somebody said in the chat, really, Amanda said in the chat, really expensive trucks. I'd like you now to open, I think there's one more. I'd like you now to open up to the audience if anybody wants to ask verbally a question or put the questions in the chat. Any other comments or questions that people have? I'm going to wait a couple of minutes for you to be able to gather your thoughts and ask those questions. Amanda raised her hand. Go ahead, Amanda.
Hey, everyone. First off, thank you for being with us. We really appreciate your time. This has been super interesting and just really well spent time. My question for the panel is, when we're talking about climate change, a topic that tends to be very dire in nature, how do you keep people motivated and seeing the brighter side when we're, very often talking about doomsday?
I can talk about that. So we've done a lot of research, and there's a bunch of research out there on how talking about the problems with climate change is actually oftentimes very unproductive, because people get to that shutdown state, that anxious state, and then they kind of disconnect. And so we actually don't talk about the problem because everyone knows about it. Everyone knows that climate change is the biggest issue facing our world. And so we start by saying that, we're all here because we know that. The research shows that people really care and want to do something. So let's talk about what we can do. And so that's how we, contradict that, or, fight that overwhelming anxiety and shutdown state people get to, is by really just focusing on the what we can do and let's go do it. Because that's actually what's going to make the changes we need to see.
Awesome.
Yeah, there's like one thing that I do, I like to share with people, is when I wash my hands in the restroom, I don't use a paper towel. I either bring my own towel or I just shake my hands off. Boop. How many trees did I save in the last 3 years? I'm not sure. I haven't figured it out.
Well, and with water, when you brush your teeth, you can brush your teeth without water and then just rinse your mouth out afterwards. Something as simple as that,
Yeah, and also the savings, the savings in the cost of the water, the savings like Patrick mentioned about, having the shopping list. That's always a great thing, because then you have less waste. You actually use all the food, you know what you're going to make that week, and then maybe have, like my mom always had a leftover night, so I think we actually had a lot less food waste a long time ago, I guess, because they were more frugal, or there was too many kids. That might have been it too.
Not so much fast food. Yeah. Did anybody else want to comment on how to keep the energy level up when it seems so doomsdayish?
I'd add, I know that Roop works with a colleague at the Climate Center, Pablo Suarez, and his wife, Jano, and Pablo uses humor. It's a way to really break things down and give people some levity. And, I think tied to what Patrick was saying, there's just so much research that shows that humor and comedy in any grave topic has a place and a role. And, I just think trying to create those spaces where, I like Amanda said it in the chat, it's progress, not perfection, and also point towards solutions. We just did a project where it was a little bit, the naysayers were like, you only installed solar panels on 2 homes, like that's only 2 beneficiaries. And I'm like, let's translate into the carbon capture or the equivalent of number of trees that could have been or would have had to have been planted. And it's like 113 trees, per year. So like, I think just like translating some of the mystique around impact, like there are things that are working. We just have to do more of it. And I think that asset-based approach and positivity can really help when things seem a bit grim.
Eric Smits has his hand up. Eric, do you want to ask a question? Thank you, Jono.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Jill, and thank you to all the presenters for an excellent presentation. I was recently listening to an interview with a couple of reporters who focus pretty primarily on the climate crisis, and they had mentioned that there have been leaked memos from various fossil fuel industry players suggesting that the whole, like everybody, individual response, it was a sort of a strategy to stay away from people like folks, scientists and activists looking at the more systemic problems with the fossil fuel industry and emissions and creating the climate crisis. So I was wondering if any of you have thought about or have done work on how to balance sort of the need for individuals to take action like recycling and, conserving energy and water, as opposed to, not losing the forest for the trees and really focusing on the systemic issues, which are far more prevalent, like, industries, the aviation industry, agriculture industry, fossil fuel industry, and all that. Thank you again.
Roop, you're nodding your head. And Jono, you're nodding your head. Roop, go for it. And then Jono. Yeah. And Marianne, all of you have a comment. Go for it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question and a really big one because, if we look at climate change and the causes of climate change, it's because we're burning fossil fuels. And I feel like there's kind of sometimes people say it's an either or. Either you take individual actions, what are you doing about climate change? Or others are kind of like, oh, we need to be focusing on the fossil fuel industry and we shouldn't be doing anything ourselves. And I think that dichotomy isn't helpful in the way that we as human beings are addressing this. So personally, I don't think I can do everything to change climate, to reduce the impacts of climate change myself. But I am enabled to find out what's happening locally. Where are my energy sources coming from? Who are my elected officials and what are they doing when it comes to climate change? Because obviously one of the things that I can do is vote, and that would help with some of the sort of more systemic issues. But then I also think that it helps people to engage in the systemic issues if they can do things on their own at home. So doing the smaller things like recycling and being aware of your own energy sources. I think both are really important, but like you're saying, we can't lose sight of the bigger picture by only focusing on the smaller things that we can do.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, there's healthy doses of skepticism in corporations, even outside of climate change. When I think of like what I call the sugar industry and like health effects, on children and adults. So I think it's universal to have healthy doses of skepticism. And it's not just calling out the corporate for-profits or nonprofits also have bad actors inside them. It's just kind of the nature of human behavior. But to that extent, yes, I think those memos are powerful and that research is powerful, but also just knowing that it's led to some pretty amazing quantum leaps. The fact that Exxon has 3 green investors on their board of directors, unheard of. Like, if you would have said 10 years ago that Exxon would have 3 green investors as their board of directors, members of their board of directors, I would have said not in a million years. So I think for good, bad, or otherwise, I think because I'm an economist by training, because returns in ESG investing and green investing are now parallel, if not better, than in some traditional sectors, it's attracting many individuals that may have stayed away from investment opportunities to really green, otherwise pervasive contributors to the problem. So in that sense, I think that's going to be a trend that we're going to see. And quite frankly, using Exxon as a case example, it allows the dialogue to happen with other companies that have, really larger contributions to the problem. To Roop's point, it's both and, not either or.
I was going to mention BlackRock is another agency. The CEO at BlackRock has said he's not going to work with investors or not support his investors, participants, buying any stocks that were in non-sustainable corporations. So I thought that was, and they're one of the biggest brokerages that I know of. Scott has a question. Has his hand raised. Scott, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. First, I'd like to say thank you for this excellent presentation. The question I have is really, what's something that's happened for the presenters that's really inspired you recently or given you hope in the work that you do?
Brett, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll share something. So last week I was able to participate in a field day that was part of a conference that happens every year. Well, it usually happens every year except for COVID, but it's called the Ecological Farming Conference. Happens in Asilomar here in Monterey Peninsula. And it was virtual this year because of Omicron. Usually happens in January, but they're doing some farm field days as part of the, in-person component. And we visited a place called Pie Ranch. It's a nonprofit farm on the San Mateo coast, and they have been working over the last 15 years to basically build relationship with the native communities that used to inhabit those lands, so that they can have a role in stewarding those lands. And so they have a garden that where they grow things that were meaningful to native communities. And this was a place that was affected by the CZU complex fire. And so we saw a lot of the eucalyptus trees that had burned, and they are now trying to plant more native plants there that aren't so prone to fire. And it was really inspiring to be there. And they had signed an MOU, the organization and the tribe, many years ago, and they updated the MOU and had a signing ceremony there. And it was just beautiful to see how relationships that have been broken over centuries can be repaired and rebuilt over time, with people being willing to try to rebuild trust, and so it was the whole spectrum of those social relationships and the natural world and how they coexist there. It was really beautiful to see.
Wonderful. Does anybody else have any other questions? I have one last question for the group before they disappear, but does anybody else from the audience have a question that they want to ask? Please unmute yourself or ask in the chat, and I'll search you out. Or maybe I'll ask my question, and if something comes up while I'm asking the question, then you can ask it. Okay. I want to know, because all of you are in such challenging positions with climate change. You're all dealing with not just the public but individuals. And how do you personally take care of yourself? Being that I wear another hat, not just international, I also wear the mental health hat. You'll forgive me for that. But how do you, as individuals with such a challenging focus, take care of yourselves personally? I only ask difficult questions.
I work remote, as many of us do now, and so I always make sure to take like at least a half-hour walk in the middle of the day with my dog. And I have a big garden that I like to wake up and spend time in. It's flourishing right now with the spring season.
What kind of dog?
A cockapoo. He's actually sleeping on my feet right now.
Oh, you can bring him up if you want.
Not
Oh,
anymore.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
He's
Thank you for that.
He's the chief furry officer of Community Climate Solutions.
That's great. That's absolutely great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Others, please. Any of the others of you want to share how you personally take care of yourself?
I was, no kidding, I was gonna show a picture of little Penny, and
Oh,
I think we made a 12-hour drive in an electric vehicle to get to my folks' house, and it was delightful. Like any other time pre-animal, I would have said 26 hours. That's a long ways, but surrounding myself with little fur baby, and also I think just being willing to unplug. I think growing up in the disaster response space, it's like nonstop all the time, and you have I grew up Catholic, so I had a lot of guilt. And wanting to step away for a while. And I think it's extremely important just to recognize that we're unfortunately going to be doing this for a while. And if there's a delight and surprise that it happens to end sooner than we expect, then super, and we can recalibrate. But fur babies, I'm a big believer in now.
that's great. Thank you both Patrick and Jono. Go for it. The other ones, please share.
Maybe I can add. I think as you spend more time on this work, you realize that you're definitely going to face challenges, and there are definitely going to be times when you don't feel hopeful. And being okay with that and sort of just moving through those times, giving yourself space to then maybe not talk about climate change at home and sort of have it just be your work thing is okay. And then you, over time, at least I've found that like you slowly regain your passion for it when you feel like you've made enough space. And I feel like I go through these cycles, and it's because we're working on such a challenging problem. So sticking through with it and making space for yourself, I think, is really helpful.
Thank you, Roop. Thank you. Okay, Brett and Marianne.
Go ahead, Marianne. What do you got there?
All right,
We
wait,
lost
see if I
you.
can make it here. See if I can make it. Okay, so I just started. I put a kayak in Loch Lomond, up 2 miles away from me, and that's out kayaking now, if you can tell. But anyway, it's my puppy. That's my fur baby, Doshi, who needs a lot of help. Poor thing, he has this harness so I can pick him up. But yeah, we go out and we go paddling all the way to the end where the river comes in, and I use and there's no cell connectivity. It's really cool. So I'm unplugged, and then sometimes I sing if there's no one on the sides of the lake when I'm heading back. I'll sing. But other than that, it's a lot of fun. Maybe do a podcast, but usually I just listen to the birds singing and recharge.
Something that most people don't know about Marianne is she got married in a kayak.
Yeah,
Wow.
and we rolled, and then we came back up at the same time. It was pretty fun.
And Brett, please go for
Yeah.
it.
Well, I mean, really appreciate what everyone has said, and I try to do all those things as well. I've been telling my wife, like, our house was taken over by animals somehow, and they bring so much joy. And I have a big garden. I think it's really hard. I mean, what Roop said really resonated with me because it's just day by day, and it can be hard to unplug. But just have to get up every day and keep trying and know that the work that we're doing is important, but if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to continue to do it. So important.
What kind of animals are you run by?
So we have 3 dogs, a golden retriever who's 14, a black lab golden retriever mix who's her son, and a pandemic rescue who is a what is she? She's a tiny little thing. Now I'm forgetting. And her name is Roxy. And then we have 4 cats who are all rescues, all different ages, indoor and outdoor. We live a bit in the country, and our neighbors have, chickens and goats, so we can admire them.
The goats are great for cleaning your lawn. They're wonderful. They eat your lawn. Good recycling. Yeah. Anyway, this is so wonderful. Thank you for sharing your personal stories and the ways that you take care of yourself, and giving people some idea of what they can do in their own community and with their own homes in really lightening that load. And I just want to thank every single one of you, because I know an hour and a half is a really long time to take out of your busy lives. I want to thank all of you for participating as panelists. And I wanted to let you know that if you think of other resources that people might want, we send a letter out next week with the recording and any added resources that you'd like to share with the people on this call. So I just want to thank you all personally from the bottom of my heart from coming to talk about this, because I know sometimes it's very difficult. And there are a lot of thank yous in the chat for Patrick. I think you're the one that doesn't have a chat function. And I want to thank every single one of you who showed up today, because you're here to learn. And that's what each of us need to learn. I learned something new today that I didn't know. So I just want you to know, I think I study it all the time, but I don't. There's so much I don't know. So thank you. There's one other thing. Marianne says, know your hauler and review what they take for recycling and food waste. I don't know what that means, Marianne.
Well, a lot of people don't realize what is recyclable or not, with depending on who their hauler is. In other words, who picks up their trash at their curb. And or if you're going to go to the landfill, review what they take, what gray bears take before you go. So, and you load the right way too.
Okay, and just so that you know, and we're going to finish up with that. Sorry, we went 2 minutes overboard. But Marianne is out of San Benito, Monterey, and Santa Cruz County. And she does tours of the landfill. If anybody really wants to know what a landfill looks like, so they have a little bit of dose of reality, she does that. Anyway, thank you all. Feel free. I put my email in the chat, jill.hoffman@redcross.org. Feel free to email me if you have any further questions that I can pass on to the panelists. And the panelists will let me know if it's okay next week to give them their contact info. But I want to thank you all and stay in touch. Yeah?
Thank
Goodbye,
you all.
everyone.
Really great to meet you all.
Have a wonderful day. Take
Bye.
care.
Take care.